the edge of the Boda's void, was not supposed to look like a mirror. Dr. Alara Vance stood before the observation deck of the Ethelgard, her breath fogging the reinforced quartz. Outside, the great nothingness of the great void stretched out, a 300 million light-year expanse of empty space that should have been a graveyard of dark matter. Instead, it was shimmering. It looked like the surface of a lake disturbed by a heavy stone, a ripple in the very fabric of the vacuum. "The spectrograph is twitching again, Ilara," Kalen called out from the primary terminal. The junior astrophysicist sounded more annoyed than afraid, his fingers dancing over a holographic interface that was spitting out lines of crimson error code. "It's giving me ghost readings. It says we're receiving high-energy gamma bursts from the direction of the Perseus cluster." Ilara didn't turn around. "We passed Perseus 3 weeks ago, Kale. It's behind us. We're facing the void." "I know that," Kalen snapped, though his voice trembled. "But the sensor array says the light is hitting us from the front. It's as if the stars we left behind are somehow waiting for us ahead." Ilara finally turned, her brow furrowing. "Check the timestamp on the packets." Kalen went silent. The only sound in the bridge was the low, rhythmic thrum of the ion drives and the faint hiss of the oxygen scrubbers. After a moment, he looked up, his face drained of color in the artificial glow of the monitors. "The timestamps are descending. The last packet was logged at 1400. The one that just hit us is marked 1358. Ilara, the data isn't just coming from the wrong direction, it's coming from the wrong time. The anomaly of the mug. To understand the horror of the Boata's void, one had to understand entropy. The universe was a one-way street. Eggs cracked, stars burned out, and tea grew cold. This was the second law of thermodynamics, the fundamental rule that kept the ego of humanity from collapsing into the chaos of the past. Ilara walked toward the galley to clear her head, her boots clicking rhythmically on the metallic floor. She needed caffeine to process the impossibility Kalen had just presented. The ship's gravity was set to a comfortable 9.8 meters per second squared. But as she reached for a ceramic mug, a wave of vertigo hit her. She fumbled. The mug slipped from her fingers. Time didn't slow down, not in the cinematic sense. It simply stopped making sense. She watched the mug fall toward the deck plating. She saw it strike the floor. She heard the sharp crack of ceramic meeting steel, but she didn't see the shards scatter. Instead, the pieces of the mug seemed to shiver. They didn't lie still. They vibrated with a frantic, unnatural energy. Then, with a sickening liquid motion, the shards leaped upward. They spun in a chaotic dance, fitting themselves back together in midair with the precision of a master clockmaker. The tea, which had splashed across her boots, defied gravity, spiraling upward in amber ribbons to pour itself back into the mending vessel. The mug settled into her palm, warm and whole. Ilara stared at it. Her hand was shaking. She hadn't caught it. The universe had simply decided that the breaking of the mug was an event that no longer belonged in the present. "Commander Vance," a voice crackled over the comms. It was the ship's medic, Dr. Eris. "You need to get to the medbay. Now, we have a situation with Specialist Arlo." The wound that wasn't the medbay smelled of ozone and antiseptic. Arlo, the ship's structural engineer, was sitting on the edge of a diagnostic bed, looking remarkably healthy. He was staring at his right forearm with an expression of pure, unadulterated dread. "Tell her," Eris said, gesturing toward Arlo. The doctor was holding a sterile bandage that remained unused. "I burned myself," Arlo whispered, 20 minutes ago, realigning the thermal conduits. It was a nasty one, 3rd degree, smelled like charred meat. I came in here because I was about to pass out from the pain." Alara looked at his arm. The skin was smooth, tan, and perfectly intact. There wasn't even a freckle out of place. "The pain came first," Arlo continued, his voice rising in pitch. "I felt the heat. I felt the skin blistering. I screamed. But when I looked down to put the salve on, the burn started shrinking. It turned from a blister to a red mark, then to a pink smudge, and then it just vanished. It unhappened, Alara." "Maybe the autodoc," Alara began. "I didn't touch the autodoc," Arlo shouted. "I felt the pain of a wound I don't have anymore. How can I hurt from something that hasn't happened? Or something that unhappened?" Eris stepped forward, dropping his voice. "It's not just Arlo. I checked the biorhythms of the whole crew. Our cellular degradation is reversing. It's marginal, nanoseconds per second, but the telomeres in our DNA are lengthening. We aren't aging, Alara. We're reeling backward." The gutter opens. Alara returned to the bridge, her mind racing through every theoretical paper she had ever read on temporal mechanics. She thought of the arrow of time, the concept that time flows in the direction of increasing disorder. If the arrow had flipped, it meant they had entered a region of space where entropy was negative. "Kalen, get me a visual on the void center," she commanded. "I can't," Kalen said. He was hunched over the console, his eyes wide. "The light, it's not reaching the sensors anymore. It's being sucked back toward the source. It's like a black hole. But instead of eating matter, it's eating the sequence of events." "Magnify the edge of the distortion," Alara said. The main view screen flickered. The shimmer they had seen earlier was no longer a ripple. It was a great wall of shimmering iridescent static. It looked like a glitch in reality. As they watched, a small scout drone they had deployed an hour ago appeared on the screen. The drone was flying backward. Its thrusters were firing, but the exhaust was being sucked into the nozzles. It was retracing its flight path with impossible precision. "It's a Chronos gutter," Alara whispered, the realization chilling her blood. "A drainage point for causality." "What does that mean?" Kalen asked. "It means the universe is a closed system," Alara said, turning to the window. "And somewhere in this void, there's a leak. Time is pouring out of the bucket. We aren't just seeing things in reverse. We are being pulled into a sector of space where the future is the past. If we don't turn the ship around, we'll hit the event horizon." "And then?" Alara looked at her hands. She thought of the mug. She thought of Arlo's missing burn. "Then we'll continue to de-age. Our memories will evaporate because the neurons that formed them haven't fired yet. We'll become children, then infants, then we'll simply cease to have been born. We won't die. Kalen, we'll be deleted." Suddenly, the ship groaned. The structural integrity alarm blared, but the sound was wrong. It was a series of sharp, rhythmic pulses that ended before they began. The Ethel Guard lurched, not forward, but with a strange, recoiling motion. "The engines!" Kalen yelled. "They're running in reverse. They're turning fuel back into plasma." Outside, the stars began to change color. The distant ancient red giants shifted toward a youthful, violent blue. The void wasn't empty anymore. It was filling with the ghosts of stars that had died billions of years ago, returning to life to claim their place in a sky that was forgetting how to end. The scientists on the Ether Guard weren't just observers anymore. They were the first victims of a universe that had decided to take it all back. The bridge of the Ether Guard was no longer a place of logic. It had become a cathedral of impossible physics. Every light on the console flickered with a rhythmic, pulsing cadence that felt like a heartbeat, but a heartbeat skipping a beat to return to the one before. Dr. Alara Vance gripped the edge of the navigation table, her knuckles white. She felt a strange, electric tingle in her teeth, a phantom sensation of a meal she hadn't yet eaten. "We have to stabilize the internal chronometers," Alara said, her voice sounding hollow, as if the sound waves were being pulled back into her throat the moment they left. "If we lose our internal sense of now, we lose the ability to perceive the next." Kalen didn't answer. He was staring at his hands. He was holding a small silver stylus, spinning it between his fingers. Suddenly, the stylus vanished from his grip and reappeared on the desk, perfectly still. "I didn't drop it," Kalen whispered, his eyes wide. "I was about to drop it. I felt the slip. I felt the panic of losing it. But the desk already had it. The effect is accelerating, Alara. The result is starting to outrun the cause. The physics of the reverse." Alara pushed away from the console, her movement sluggish. The air in the ship felt thick, like walking through honey. She headed toward the common room, a space designed for relaxation that was now the epicenter of the crew's collective breakdown. As she entered, she saw Specialist Arlo sitting at a low table. He looked younger than he had 10 minutes ago in the med bay. The crow's feet around his eyes had smoothed into porcelain skin. Beside him sat a cup of Earl Grey tea, steam rising in lazy, elegant swirls. "Watch," Arlo said. His voice was higher, the timbre of a man in his early 20s rather than his late 30s. He didn't touch the cup. He simply stared at it. Suddenly, the cup began to rattle against the saucer. With a violent, jarring motion, the ceramic shattered. Shards of white porcelain sprayed across the table, and the dark amber liquid splashed onto Arlo's uniform. Alara gasped, stepping forward to help, but Arlo held up a hand. "Wait!" The shards didn't lay still. They began to slide across the table, vibrating with a high-pitched hum that set Ilara's teeth on edge. The liquid, instead of soaking into the fabric of Arlo's jumpsuit, began to bead up like mercury. It rolled backward, climbing the jagged edges of the broken ceramic. The shards leapt into the air, spinning with a mathematical precision that no human hand could replicate. They fused, the cracks vanishing as if they had never existed. The cup settled back onto the saucer, full and steaming. Arlo picked it up and took a sip. "It's not just that it's happening," Arlo said, his eyes filled with a terrifying lucidity. "It's that I remember the mess. I remember the heat of the tea on my leg, but my leg is dry. My jumpsuit is clean. I am carrying the memory of a future that has been erased by the past. The entropic debt." Alara sat across from him, her mind spinning. She reached out and touched a shard of porcelain that had failed to rejoin the cup, a tiny sliver, no larger than a fingernail. It was freezing to the touch. "Negative entropy," she murmured. "In our universe, energy spreads out. It dissipates. That's why things break. That's why we die. But here, energy is concentrating. It's pulling itself together. Is that a bad thing? Arlo asked, his voice cracking. I mean, look at me. I'm younger. My back doesn't ache anymore. My lungs feel new. It's a catastrophic thing, Arlo, Ilara said, her voice sharp. Think about the biology. Your body is a series of chemical reactions. If those reactions reverse, you aren't just getting younger. Your brain is unwiring itself. The synaptic connections that form your personality, your skills, your love for your family, they are physical structures. If the arrow of time flips, those structures dismantle. You'll forget how to speak. You'll forget how to breathe. You'll revert to a zygote, and then to nothing. She looked at the shard in her hand. It was vibrating. It wanted to go back to the cup, but it was trapped by her grip. We are an anomaly within an anomaly. The ship's localized gravity field is trying to maintain a forward-moving frame of reference, but the void is stronger. We're like fish swimming upstream against a waterfall of time. The scream of the void. The ship's intercom crackled to life. It wasn't a voice that came through, but a sound that Ilara would later describe as the sound of a star being unborn. It was a low-frequency moan that rose into a shimmering crystalline chime. Ilara, to the observation deck. It was Dr. Aris, the medic. He sounded frantic. Ilara and Arlo ran. As they moved through the corridors, the ship felt like it was breathing. The walls seemed to pulse. They passed a maintenance drone that was systematically unscrewing a panel it had just finished repairing, its robotic arm moving with a terrifying, jerky grace. When they reached the observation deck, Eris was pointing out at the darkness. The Boda's void was no longer empty. The great nothing was filling with ghosts. Faint, translucent spheres of light were appearing in the distance, the echoes of ancient supernovae. But they weren't exploding. They were imploding. Brilliant rings of gas were being sucked into central points of light, growing brighter and more compact until they vanished into the darkness. They're returning to their nebulae, Eris whispered. The stars are going back into the oven. Look at the Ethelgard's wake, Ilara commanded. Behind the ship, the trail of ion exhaust wasn't dissipating into space. It was tightening, forming a solid line of glowing blue light that stretched back toward the center of the Kronos gutter. The ship was being unmoved. We're being reeled in, Kalen said, appearing at the doorway. Looked smaller, his oversized uniform hanging off his thinning frame. The gutter isn't just a place, it's a drain, and we're the water. The shard's revenge. Ilara looked down at her hand. She realized she was still holding the tiny shard of the teacup. It was no longer cold. It was burning hot. The energy required to keep it from its correct place in time was manifesting as heat. Everything wants to go back, she realized. The universe has a memory of where it came from, and it's finally deciding to return to the source. She opened her hand. The shard didn't fall. It shot across the room like a bullet, slamming into the teacup on the table where they had left it. The cup didn't break. It absorbed the shard with a sound like a soft sigh. But then the horror truly began. Arlo let out a strangled cry. He clutched his chest, falling to his knees. I can see it, he gasped. See what? Ilara knelt beside him. The end, Arlo whimpered. Except it's the beginning. I see the sun, but it's blue. I see the earth, but the oceans are rising into the sky. I see my mother. She's undying. She's coming back to life, Ilara. but she's crying because she knows she's going to disappear." He looked up at Alara, and for a second she didn't see a grown man. She saw a terrified child staring out of an adult's eyes. Why is it doing this? Why is it taking everything back? Alara looked at the monitor. The timestamps on the ship's computer were now counting down in hours, not minutes. "Because we found the edge of the canvas," Alara said, her voice trembling, "and someone has started rolling it up." The ship lurched again, a massive structural groan echoing through the hull. This time, it wasn't the engines. It was the metal itself. The Ethelgard was a new ship, barely 5 years old, but as Alara watched, the scratches on the walls vanished. The worn floor pads became pristine. The ship was becoming new again, and in the vacuum of space, a ship that hadn't been built yet was a death sentence. "Kalen!" Alara shouted over the rising chime of the void. "The engine logs. If the fuel is turning back into raw matter, we're going to have a pressure overload in the tanks. The future of this ship is an explosion, but the past of this ship is a shipyard on Mars. We're headed for the shipyard." "We'll never make it," Kalen cried, his voice now high and prepubescent. "We'll be gone before we hit the atmosphere." Alara stood up, her jaw set. "Not if we create a paradox. If we can't go forward, we have to make the past so broken that time has no choice but to spit us out." She looked at the teacup, sitting perfectly whole on the table. She picked it up and threw it against the wall. It shattered. It mended. She threw it again. "We have to fight the flow," she whispered. "Every action we take must be an act of chaos. We have to become the friction in the gears of the universe." Outside, the first star blinked out of existence, returning to the void from which it came. If the Chronos gutter was a leak, then the collapse of causality was the flood. Dr. Alara Vance stood in the center of the bridge, her body feeling lighter, her joints more fluid, a terrifying physical testament to her own regression. The Ethelgard was no longer just a ship. It was a vessel of contradictions. On the primary monitors, the Buddha's void was expanding, but not outward. It was swallowing the surrounding space-time like a drain, pulling the future into its dark, hungry throat. "Get me Earth," Alara commanded. Her voice sounded higher, the authoritative rasp of her 40 years replaced by the clear, melodic tone of a woman in her early 20s. "I need the deep space network. Now." Kalen, now looking like a teenager in a flight suit 3 sizes too large, fumbled with the comms. "The signal. It's looping, Alara. I send a burst, and I receive the reply before I even finish the transmission. But the replies, they don't make sense." "Patch it through." The main screen flickered to life. The face of Admiral Holloway appeared, but the image was stuttering. It wasn't digital lag. It was temporal ghosting. Holloway's face blurred between a weathered, gray-haired man and a vibrant, dark-haired lieutenant. "Ethelgard, do you copy?" Holloway's voice was a discordant duet of 2 different ages. "We are seeing it here. The Hubble... No, the James Webb. It's seeing the galaxies in the Virgo supercluster. They're spinning backward. The light is blue-shifted to a violent degree." "Admiral, we are inside the expansion zone," Alara said, leaning toward the camera. "Entropy is reversing. Our internal systems are reverting to their manufacturing states. How far has the effect spread?" Holloway's image flickered violently. Behind him, the command center on Earth seemed to be deconstructing. Screens were vanishing. High-tech consoles were being replaced by older, bulkier monitors. It's contagious, Holloway said. His eyes were wide with a primal horror. The reverse is a wave. It's traveling at the speed of thought. Scientists, they're horrified, Ilara. They've realized the Big Bang wasn't the beginning. It was the destination. We are all being pulled back toward the singularity. Admiral? Ilara shouted. We're forgetting, Holloway screamed, his voice suddenly youthful and thin. The history books. The pages are turning blank. Yesterday is becoming tomorrow. We just lost the moon. It's moving closer to Earth, returning to the impact zone from 4 billion years ago. Ilara, if you can't stop it, we never existed. The screen went black, not because of a power failure, but because the technology required to transmit the signal had just been uninvented on the other end. The logic of the undone Ilara turned back to the bridge. The horror was no longer just a physical threat. It was an existential eraser. He's right, she whispered. Causality is collapsing. If the effect reaches the sun will reabsorb its radiation. It will grow cooler, larger, and then it will become a nebula again. Everything humanity has built, every bridge, every poem, every child, is being unmade. We have to do something, Kalen cried. He was clutching his head. I can't remember my graduation. I can see the ceremony, but the details are fading, like ink in the rain. I remember being 10 years old more clearly than I remember this morning. That's because this morning hasn't happened yet in the void's new timeline, Ilara realized. She walked to the central holomap. The Buddha's void was a dark bruise on the map, but it was glowing with a strange, inverted light. Think about it, Kalen. If time is running backward, then effects are seeking their causes. The reason we're feeling the pain before the wound is because the universe is trying to justify the existence of the wound. It's backfilling the logic. She tapped a command into the console. The ship's AI, Aurora, responded with a voice that was noticeably less sophisticated, its vocabulary shrinking as its neural network reverted to an earlier version. Analysis. Temporal flux at 400%. Aurora chirped. Warning. Structural integrity of hull is increasing. Metal fatigue is vanishing. Warning. Fuel reserves are transforming into refined isotope pellets. We're becoming a bomb, Arlo said, stumbling onto the bridge. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with the vitality of a 19-year-old. The fuel tanks, they weren't designed to hold solid pellets. They're meant for liquid plasma. If the fuel continues to revert, the tanks will burst from the inside out. The paradox protocol. Ilara looked at the teacup shards still scattered near the corner. They were vibrating again, trying to fuse into a cup that she had intentionally smashed 3 times. We need a paradox, Ilara said, her eyes flashing with a desperate brilliance. The universe is a machine that runs on logic. If we create a situation that is logically impossible, even in reverse, we might create a friction point, a knot in the timeline. How? Kalen asked. Everything we do just becomes part of the reverse flow. Not if we act against our own future past, Ilara said. She began typing furiously. The Ethelgard was built in the year 2042. We arrived here in 2046. In the current flow, we are moving toward 2042. If we reach 2042, the ship will be in the shipyard, and we'll be civilians on Earth. She looked at her crew. "We need to destroy the ship, but we have to destroy it in a way that it cannot have been built." "That's impossible," Harris said, joining them. He looked like a medical student, his gray hair now a thick chestnut brown. "If we destroy it now, in this backward time, won't it just undestroy itself as we move further back?" "Not if we use the entropy engine," Ilara said. "I've been calculating. The engine doesn't just push the ship. It creates a wake of disorder. If we can overload the core and vent the entropy directly into the gutter, we create a forward bubble, a pocket where time is forced to move at t equals +1. The weight of memories, the ship groaned again. This time, a section of the ceiling panels simply vanished, replaced by the raw, unpolished girders of the initial construction phase. The Ethel Guard was being dismantled by the hands of time. Ilara felt a sudden sharp pain in her heart. Not a physical pain, but a memory being ripped away. She saw her husband's face. David. They had met in 2038. As she watched the temporal sensors, the date clicked back to 2039. No, she thought. Not yet. She could feel the love she had for him thinning, becoming the tentative, nervous excitement of a first date. Soon, it would become the indifference of a stranger. This was the true horror scientists hadn't predicted. The death of the soul through the reversal of experience. "Ilara, look!" Kalen pointed to the view screen. Outside, a massive celestial object was drifting into view. It was a planet, or the ghost of one. It was shimmering with blue light, its atmosphere being pulled away in long, elegant streamers that led back toward the void. That's a Rogu planet from the void," Harris whispered. "It's being reborn. Look at the oceans forming." "It's not just a planet," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "It's a warning. If that planet returns to its sun, and that sun returns to its nebula, the mass of this sector will reach a critical point. The gutter will close, and everything inside it will be crushed into the first second of the Big Bang." She turned to her crew, her voice firm despite her youthful appearance. "We are the only ones who know the universe is ending in reverse. We are the only ones who can throw a wrench in the gears." "What do we do?" Arlo asked, his voice steady for the first time. "We go to the engine room," Ilara said. "We're going to build a bomb made of... Now, we're going to force the universe to remember the future, even if it kills us." As they ran toward the aft of the ship, the lights began to change. The warm LEDs were being replaced by the harsh, flickering fluorescence of the ship's early testing phase. The walls were becoming cleaner, the air fresher, and the terror deeper. The causality collapse was no longer a theory. It was the ceiling coming down, the floor coming up, and the very memories in their heads turning to ash before they had even been burned. The air in the Ethelgard's engineering bay was too sweet. The face looking back was 22, wide-eyed and terrifyingly soft. The fine lines of worry, the scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the slight puffiness of chronic sleep deprivation, all were being edited out by the Chronos gutter. "Elara," a voice called out. It was high, cracking with the awkward register of a boy whose vocal cords were in the midst of a violent transition. She turned to see Kalen. He was swimming in his flight suit. The heavy fabric, designed for a man of 6 feet, was bunched at his ankles and wrists. His face was round, his jawline receding into the soft curves of a 12-year-old. I can't reach the manual override," Kalen whimpered, holding up hands that were small and pudgy. "My fingers are too short. And Elara, I can't remember how to calculate the phase shift. I know there's a formula involving the Planck constant, but the variables they're dissolving." This was the unbirth. It wasn't just a physical reversal, it was a cognitive erosion. As their brains physically reverted to previous states, the synaptic pathways formed by years of study and experience were being dismantled. The future knowledge they possessed was being overwritten by the past biology of their younger selves. "Focus, Kyle," Elara said, though she felt a sudden, dizzying wave of vertigo. For a split second, she didn't remember why she was on a spaceship. She felt a phantom urge to call her mother, a woman who, in this temporal flow, was currently becoming younger herself, perhaps even undying in a nursing home 3,000 light-years away. The formula is delta t equals delta t0 over the square root of 1 minus v squared over a z squared. But we have to invert the Lorentz factor for negative entropy, Elara whispered, forcing the numbers to stay in her mind like sand in a sieve. "Write it down. Use the manual stylus. Paper doesn't have a neural network. It might hold the ink longer than we can hold the thought." The nursery of horrors in the med bay. The situation was grimmer. Dr. Eris, now a teenager with a mop of unruly brown hair, was struggling to restrain Specialist Arlo. Arlo was screaming, but the sound wasn't human. It was the rhythmic, high-pitched wail of an infant trapped in a man's body. His muscular frame was shrinking with visible, agonizing speed. His bones were softening, lengthening, then shortening again as his skeleton remodeled itself to a more primitive state. "His motor functions are collapsing," Eris shouted, his own voice straining. "Elara, the ship's gravity is fluctuating because the stabilizers are reverting to their prototype blueprints. If we hit 0G while his bone density is this low, his rib cage will collapse." Elara ran to the med bay, her own gait becoming bouncy, her stride shortening. She looked at Arlo. His eyes were wide, but the intelligence in them was flickering like a dying candle. He looked at Elara, and for a moment the man returned. "Don't let me. Go back further." Arlo gasped, his voice a rasp. "I don't want to be nothing. I remember a girl, my daughter. If I go back to before she was born, does she still exist? Or is she just a dream I haven't had yet?" Elara had no answer. According to the logic of the gutter, Arlo's daughter was currently ungrowing in a house on Earth, her entire existence being retracted into the womb, then into the genetic code, then into the void. "We're almost ready with the static anchor," Elara lied, her voice trembling. "Just hold on to who you are, Arlo. Think of one thing, one memory. Anchor yourself to it." Arlo's hand, now small and delicate, gripped Elara's. "The color of her hair," he whispered. "Red, like a dying star. Then his grip slackened. His eyes lost their focus, turning into the milky, wandering gaze of a newborn. The man named Arlo was gone, replaced by a biological vessel that was rapidly approaching its own beginning. The engineering of now Alara fled back to the engine room. She couldn't afford the grief. She was losing the capacity to feel it. Every minute, a year of her life was being reclaimed by the void. She felt her technical vocabulary slipping. Words like asymmetric, singularity, and entropy were starting to feel like heavy stones she couldn't lift. Kalen was sitting on the floor, crying. He was a child now, perhaps 8 years old. He had abandoned the stylus. Instead, he was drawing circles in the dust on the floor. "Kyle, get up," Alara commanded, her voice thin. "I want to go home," the boy sobbed. "I want my bed. Why is the big machine making that noise?" The big machine, the main ion drive, was no longer humming. It was breathing. The sound was a low, guttural throb that synchronized with the flickering lights. The ship was now in its pre-launch state. The walls were covered in handwritten notes, from engineers who hadn't even written them yet. Alara realized with a jolt of terror that the Ethelgard was literally becoming a ghost ship. The more it reverted, the less real it became in the current space-time. She crawled toward the Entropy engine, the device she had conceptualized only an hour ago, or was it a lifetime ago? It was a crude assembly of wires, cooling rods, and a concentrated core of unstable isotopes. Its purpose was simple: to create a localized burst of absolute chaos. In a universe running backward toward perfect order, a burst of disorder would act like a brake. But she couldn't remember how to trigger the sequence. She stared at the control panel. The labels were in English, but the letters were starting to look like meaningless shapes. Her brain, now that of a teenager, was losing the high-level symbolic processing required for advanced physics. "Entropy," she whispered, tasting the word. "The break. The mess. I have to make a mess." She looked at the teacup shards she had brought with her. They were vibrating in her pocket. She pulled them out and realized they were the only things that stayed broken. Because she had broken them inside the gutter, they were a part of the backward flow. If she could feed the broken into the mending core of the engine, she might create the friction they needed. The point of no return. "Alara," she turned. Dr. Orris was standing in the doorway. He wasn't a teenager anymore. He was a child, no older than 5. He was holding a medical scanner as if it were a toy, his face a mask of innocent confusion. Behind him, the med bay was empty. Arlo's uniform lay in a heap on the floor, a small, wet bundle at its center that was rapidly shrinking into a single cell. "The stars are gone, Alara," Eris said, his voice small and sweet. "It's all dark outside. The night is coming back." Alara looked at the view screen. He was right. The blue stars had vanished. The nebulae had retracted. The universe was returning to the dark ages, the period before the first stars ignited. She felt a sudden, sharp contraction in her stomach. Her own body was screaming. She was shrinking. Her clothes were a cavernous weight. She looked at her hands, tiny, unblemished, the hands of a girl who had never touched a telescope, never kissed a husband, never seen the edge of the world. "I am Alara Vance," she told herself, the thought a flickering spark. "I am a scientist. I am." She lunged for the Entropy engine, her small fingers scrambling over the cold metal. She didn't need the formula anymore. She didn't need the math. She just needed to destroy. She jammed the shards of the teacup into the intake manifold of the reactor. The machine shrieked. It was a sound of fundamental protest. The perfect energy of the reverse flow collided with the broken reality of the shards. Sparks showered the room, not blue, but a violent, chaotic white. "Kale! Eris!" Alara shouted, her voice a high-pitched silver bell. "Hold on to something!" The ship bucked. The reversal didn't stop, but it stuttered. For a fraction of a second, the clocks on the wall spun forward, then backward, then stayed still. Alara collapsed to the floor, her heart racing with the frantic beat of a child. She looked out the window and saw it, a ripple in the darkness. The static anchor was holding. They were a tiny, shivering bubble of now in a universe that had already reached the then. But the bubble was shrinking, and outside, the Big Bang was waiting to happen again. The Eithel was no longer a ship of exploration. It had become a biological and mechanical regression chamber. The corridors, once humming with the sophisticated thrum of ion drive technology, now echoed with the tinny, primitive clatter of early-stage hydraulic pumps. The walls had transitioned from sleek carbon fiber composites back to the brushed aluminum of the initial prototype. Dr. Alara Vance, now inhabiting the body of a 12-year-old girl, stumbled through the engineering bay. Her flight suit was a mountain of fabric she had to kick out of her way with every step. Her mind was a battlefield. One half of her brain was filled with the advanced calculus of temporal mechanics, while the other half was increasingly preoccupied with a sudden, overwhelming memory of the smell of her mother's baking and the irrational urge to find a stuffed bear she hadn't owned in 30 years. "Focus, Alara," she whispered, her voice a high-pitched silver bell. "The engine, the mess, the entropy." Behind her, Kalen was little more than a toddler, sitting amidst a pile of oversized technical manuals, tearing the pages out and laughing as the paper yellowed and smoothed itself back into unpulped wood in his hands. Dr. Eris was gone, or rather, he had reverted beyond the point of complex life, leaving only a small, pulsing mass of stem cells on the medbay floor. The horror of the Chronos gutter had reached its zenith. The universe outside the viewport was no longer a tapestry of stars. It was a dense, overheated fog of primordial hydrogen. The future had been retracted so far that the Ethelgard was currently drifting through the era of recombination, the moment shortly after the Big Bang when the universe first became transparent, the machine of chaos. In the center of the bay sat the Entropy engine. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a device, a jagged spire of mismatched components Alara had slapped together before her hands became too small to grip a wrench. At its core was a It wants to go back to the singularity, the ultimate state of low entropy. I have to give it a reason to stay messy. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the shattered remnants of the ceramic teacup. These shards were the key. Because she had broken the cup within the temporal distortion, the act of breaking was a forward time event. To the universe around her, these jagged pieces were a logical impossibility, and Stietenchat effect without a cause. She began to feed the shards into the engine's intake manifold. The machine shrieked. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of reality being rubbed the wrong way. A jagged, violet discharge leapt from the engine to the ceiling, scorching the aluminum. For a brief, flickering moment, the clock on the wall, which had been spinning backward, shuddered and ticked forward 1 second. 1 second. Elara gasped. The sensation was like a physical blow. For that 1 second, she felt the weight of her 40 years return, the wisdom, the grief, the muscle memory of a woman who had lived. Then the gutter pulled back, and she was a child again, gasping for air. The paradox calibration. "I need more," Elara cried out, her voice breaking. "I need more chaos." She looked around the bay. Everything was too perfect. The tools were returning to their pristine, unopened boxes. The floor was losing its scuff marks. She grabbed a heavy magnetic calibrator and slammed it against the main reactor housing. Clang! The metal dented. Within heartbeats, the dent smoothed itself out, as if the molecules were remembering their original shape. "No!" she screamed. She hit it again, harder. "Stay broken. Stay messy." She realized she couldn't just damage things. She had to create a chain reaction of disorder that the universe couldn't reconcile. She turned to the ship's primary computer, a rumor. The AI was no little more than a basic arithmetic processor, its holographic avatar replaced by a blinking green cursor on a cathode ray tube monitor. "Aurora," Elara commanded, her young voice firm. "Execute the liar's paradox sequence. Route all remaining power to the cooling fans, then reverse the polarity of the magnetic seals simultaneously. Create a feedback loop that has no mathematical resolution." The computer chirped. "Error. Logical inconsistency detected. System cannot calculate 0/0. "Exactly," Elara whispered. "Don't calculate it. Feed the error into the entropy engine. Use the nothing to power the now." The bay began to shake. The violet light intensified, turning into a blinding white-hot sphere of static. The static anchor she had built was no longer just holding. It was expanding. The forward bubble was pushing against the backward tide of the boat's void, the weight of the unmade. As the entropy engine roared to life, the physical toll on Elara became nearly unbearable. She was caught in the shear, the boundary where forward time met backward time. Her left hand felt the wrinkled skin and steady pulse of a woman, while her right hand was the tiny, soft appendage of a preschooler. The pain was a jagged line running down the center of her consciousness. "Kalen!" she shouted, looking toward the toddler. But Kalen wasn't there. In his place was a shimmering, translucent silhouette, a ghost of the man he would have been, overlaid with the image of the infant he was becoming. "Elara," the ghost whispered. It was the adult Kalen's voice. "It's too much. The universe. It's too heavy. It wants to go home. It wants to be small again. We can't let it." Elara gritted her teeth, her small body trembling under the pressure of the temporal friction. "If it becomes small, it stays small forever. There will be no 2046. There will be no stars. There will be no David." At the mention of her husband's name, a surge of raw entropic emotion flooded the room. Love was the ultimate form of complexity, the highest state of entropy in a biological system. It was messy, unpredictable, and entirely resistant to the cold logic of a singular beginning. She poured that memory into the engine. She thought of the day they met, the heat of the sun on the pavement, the smell of rain, the way he laughed when she tried to explain the Fermi paradox. She let the disorder of her own life, the mistakes, the scars, the broken promises, become the fuel for the machine. The explosion of now. The entropy engine reached critical mass. The forward bubble was now 10 meters wide, encompassing the bridge and the core. Inside the bubble, time was screaming forward at 1,000 years per second. Outside, the universe was still reeling backward toward the Big Bang. The Ethel Guard was being torn apart. The front of the ship was a gleaming, futuristic vessel, while the aft was a skeleton of raw ore. "This is it," Ilara whispered, her eyes glowing with the reflected light of the paradox. She reached for the final toggle. If she flipped it, the entropy engine would detonate, releasing a wave of forward-moving causality that would act like a big bang of its own, a localized reset that would either stabilize the sector or erase it entirely. The view screen showed the final horror. The Buddha's void had shrunk to the size of a marble. It was a point of infinite density, a white-hot spark of pure potential. The Big Bang was about to happen, but it was happening in the wrong direction. The toggle down. The world didn't go black. It went white. A white so pure and absolute that it felt like being born. The entropy engine didn't just explode. It shattered the glass of the universe. The now erupted outward, a tidal wave of mess, chaos, and time, crashing against the perfect, silent order of the beginning. Ilara felt herself being stretched, her body becoming a bridge between the was and the will be. She felt every second of her 40 years return in a single, agonizing heartbeat. And then there was the sound of a teacup breaking. The silence was the first thing Ilara Vance noticed. It wasn't the silence of a quiet room or the vacuum of space. It was the silence of a universe that hadn't yet learned how to vibrate. She was suspended in a medium that was neither liquid nor air. It felt like standing in the center of a diamond, a pressurized crystalline now. Her body felt heavy, not with gravity, but with the sudden, violent return of 40 years of biological history. Her joints ached with the memory of a dozen spacewalks. Her skin bore the faint, jagged scar on her chin from the playground fall. Her mind was a cluttered, beautiful attic of equations, heartbreaks, and the specific, bitter taste of recycled ship coffee. The entropy engine was gone. The Ethel Guard was gone. Ilara opened her eyes. She wasn't in the Buddha's void anymore. She was nowhere, and she was everywhere. The loom of the singularity. In front of her, the marble she had seen from the ship's viewport was no longer a distant threat. It was a sun-bright point of infinite potential, hovering just meters away in the dark. It hummed with a frequency that bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her marrow. This was the singularity, the first second, the moment before the Big Bang turned the nothing into the everything. But something was wrong. The singularity wasn't smooth. It was pitted and scarred. Tiny, jagged lines of white light, the ceramic shards of her teacup, were embedded in its surface like shrapnel. The liar's paradox she had fed into the engine had created a localized knot of complexity within the ultimate state of order. "I broke the beginning," Ilara whispered. Her voice didn't travel. It simply existed in her head. She looked around. To her left, she saw a shimmering ribbon of blue light, the future she had come from. It was a tattered, retreating ghost of 2046, a timeline that was being retracted like a fishing line. To her right, there was a void of absolute, terrifying stillness. The universe was at a crossroads. The reverse zone had pulled the cosmos back to its starting point, but her entropy engine had provided a counter-impulse. The two forces were currently locked in a stalemate at T equals 0, the architect of chaos. A figure drifted into her field of vision. It wasn't Kalen or Eris, but a composite, a shifting, kaleidoscopic entity that wore the faces of everyone she had ever known. It spoke with the voice of the wind through a canyon. "You brought the mess," the entity said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation of a fundamental shift in the blueprints. "The universe was running backward," Ilara said, her thoughts sharp and defiant. "It was unmaking us. It was turning the story back into a blank page." "Order is peace," the entity replied, its face shifting to that of her husband, David, then back to a stranger's. "The reversal was the correction. Complexity is a fever. Life is a friction that slows the return to the one. Why did you fight the rest?" "Because the rest is a grave," Ilara said. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she approached the scarred surface of the singularity. "Because a universe without a tomorrow is just a museum of was. We aren't just friction. We're the point of the whole thing." She saw the ceramic shards glowing brighter. They were tiny anchors of forward stuck in the beginning. They were preventing the singularity from being a perfect, symmetrical sphere. Because of those shards, the next explosion wouldn't be uniform. It would be asymmetrical. It would have flaws. It would have the capacity for stars to form, for planets to wobble, and for evolution to take the long, winding path through the mud. The choice of the spark. The entity moved closer, its form becoming more solid, more human. It looked like Dr. Eris now, in his full, weathered age. "If you trigger the expansion now, using the energy from your engine, you will be the catalyst for the next cycle. But you cannot go back to 2046. That version of the tape has been erased. You will be the first grain of sand in a new desert." Ilara looked at this singularity. She felt the immense pressure of the first second. If she let go, the reverse would win, and the universe would stay a single silent point of perfection for eternity. If she pushed, she would spark a new Big Bang, one tainted by her presence, her memories, and her broken teacup. "Will they exist?" she asked. "Kalen, Arlo, David, in some form, in some time. Probability is the child of chaos. By breaking the perfection of the beginning, you have ensured that maybe exists again." Ilara took a deep breath. She thought of the Ethel Guard. She thought of the horror she had seen, the unbirthing, the erasure, the cold logic of the void. She realized that the scientists were horrified, not because time was moving backward, but because they had seen the end of possible. She placed her hand directly onto the white-hot surface of the singularity, right where a shard of the teacup protruded. The heat was beyond physical. It was the heat of 1 billion suns, the kinetic energy of every heartbeat that would ever happen. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it. She poured every ounce of her entropic soul into the crack. "Let there be a mess," she whispered. The expansion. The singularity didn't explode with a bang. It screamed. The white light turned into a spectrum of colors that the human eye hadn't yet evolved to see. The forward bubble she had created shattered, its energy acting as a wedge that forced the singularity to expand at a rate that defied the old laws of physics. Ilara felt herself being dismantled. Her atoms were becoming the seeds of the first hydrogen clouds. Her memories were being encoded into the background radiation of a brand new cosmos. She was the first second. As she dissolved, she saw the reverse tide being pushed back. The gutter was being filled with the raw, chaotic matter of a new creation. The stars weren't being unborn anymore. They were being dreamt of. She saw a vision of a planet, not Earth, but something like it. She saw a creature looking up at a night sky, wondering why the stars were arranged in such a strange, asymmetrical pattern. She saw a woman in a lab coat, staring at a broken mug on the floor, deciding whether to pick it up or leave it. The new now. The light faded. Ilara found herself standing on a cold, gray plain. The sky above was dark, but it wasn't the empty dark of the void. It was the dark of a theater before the play begins. In the distance, she saw a faint, rhythmic pulsing. It was the light of the first stars igniting billions of years away in space, but only a few moments away in the new flow of time. She looked down at her hands. They were solid. They were her own. She was 40 years old, and she was at the beginning of the world. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against something sharp. She pulled it out. It was a single shard of white ceramic. Ilara smiled, tears blurring her vision. Time was moving forward again. It was messy, it was dangerous, and it was heading toward 1,000,000 different endings. She didn't know where she was, or if she would ever see David again. But she knew one thing for certain: the teacup would never mend itself again. And for that, she was profoundly, horrifyingly grateful.